Hello, this is Greg Wagner, and today's class for Snoozle Learning is going to go over input validation. So this is part of our Introduction to Java um, classes. Now, input validation is basically checking data input as it comes in. So this class is basically going to give you motivation why you should check. Hint is a lot of users are stupid. So then also how you do input validation, and then then to also define what is an exception and how you do exception handling in Java. And so, kind of to kick things off, is input validation. Another word, nice, well, not so nice word of it is to call it idiot proofing. So basically, you want to assume, I mean, not all your users, but you're always going to have users that are either dumb or malicious. And I mean by that is dumb is they're not going to follow the instructions you gave them, and malicious is they're intentionally going to try to break the code. And so you want to be able to prevent people from breaking your code. For the dumb users, it'd be you want to give them a better user experience. If their program's constantly crashing or not doing what it's supposed to do, they're not going to like it and they're not going to use it. And for malicious users, they're going to try to exploit your intellectual property, and you don't want that either. Or just break it to be mean. And so what you want to do is have validation checking, which basically makes sure the data is within a range that you expect. And if it's not in the range, you can either handle it any way you see fit or you determine it's the best. And then this is something you actively do, and you kind of implement this, kind of knowing, okay, I, I expect a value between 0 and 10, but the user might hit 11 by accident or just because they didn't follow the instructions. How would I handle that? That's what input validation is. And then exception handling is basically handling errors you're not expecting. So if a program throws an error, you can catch it using an exception handler, which is called the try-catch uh, syntax. And we'll go over that a little bit later. But basically, you can handle errors. Handling errors is what exception handling is. And so, if you want to validate data, you want to make sure that it's in the right format or right range that you expect it to be. So, usually use a lot of if-then statements or use some sort of format. There's some formatting programs within Java to make sure that you have the format that you expect. And so basically, when you're validating, you're gonna actively say, okay, I want the values between this range, and if it's outside this range, how do I want to handle it? So say if it's a user input and it's outside a certain range, it's like, okay, user, can you do it again? But you might have to do a little bit of different things if you inputs from like the internet or from a file or something like that. But it's something you actively, I expect these errors. How would I deal with them? So for this demo, what we're going to be making is basically a wage calculator. And so since we're actually going to bring in some values, I'm going to import java.util.scanner. So basically, I'm going to bring in just a value so we can just scan in values. So what I like to do is I'll make a scanner. And with the scanner, when you make it, you also have to close it. And the closing that basically frees up the channels to input and output. And and so when I make anything that needs to close or be shut down, I close it right away. So I'm going to close this. Now it's not necessarily needed all the time because when you actually Java has something called garbage collection. So whenever you leave a space, it will close down stuff and free up the memory. Unlike C or C++, where you actually have to do that manually. But in this particular case, I'm just going to close it down because it's just kind of a habit. I started off as a C programmer. And so we're going to make a daily wage calculator, or weekly wage calculator. So now that we have the scanner, basically what we want to do is set up kind of reading the values. So For this particular company, we'll call it Greg Inc. The minimum wage is $10 an hour, which is the minimum wage where I live in Arizona. And let's say for my company, it doesn't pay very well. I'll pay you with stock options, I guess, if it gets too bad. The maximum wage is $8.50. Now you may notice that I'm putting F's after here. I'm using a floating point. The reason why I'm using a floating point is basically floating points have 6 decimal points of precision, whereas doubles have 15 approximately. So I'm putting this as floating point because we know for salaries we're never going to use basically a whole lot of this precision is never going to get that big, and so floating point should be fine. And then so now I need to also now I'll get the wage that you're going to enter. So I'll do the wage equals, and then I'll do scanner next float, and then I also need to put a prompt in there to get it. So I'll do system dot out dot print. How do I actually do print so I can have it all in the same line? Enter your wage, and then this will get the input value. We get the input value from the user, and then so I've inputted the wage. Now I want to check to make sure that it's actually a valid wage. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a do loop around this structure. So I'm going to do enter your wage, and then I'm going to put the max wage. So I'll say, so this loop's going to keep on going if wage is below minimum wage, and then, or if wage is greater than the maximum wage. So what's going to happen with this loop is it's going to continually flow through. Now notice I'm getting an error here, and the reason why this is the scope of this loop is between the braces, and notice how wage is outside the braces. What I need to do is put wage outside of this, and then I'm going to set it to 0, just kind of as a default value. And then one thing you need to notice is if you're using floating point, any decimal place number, it is Java assumes that it's a double. So I'm putting an F in here so it knows that it's a floating point number. Let's see, what's my error? So wage here. And I have this error here because I need to put a while in there. So I'm doing a do while loop. So do while loop basically is the same as a while loop. Like I said in my loops class, but it always goes once. Now, since I'm having the user input the values, I also kind of want to have a prompt in there that says, okay, this is why I'm having you go again. And there's really no nice way to do that in a do while loop. So I'm going to kind of just repeat this same syntax here. And have so I'm going to put a prompt in here that says system.out.println something like invalid wage, try again. So basically what this is basically just trying to reiterate what you're doing with the while portion of it, with the do while portion of it. And then I need to also do the hours portion of it. So basically what I'm going to do is, before I go on to that, I need to test out to see if it's going to run. And I already have that set up, like I said before. And so I'm enter a wage. So I'm going to try a couple of invalids. So I'm basically testing to see how well it works. So I'm going to do $9 an hour, which is below. So say invalid wage, try again. Then also now I'll do $20, which is above the 1850. It says try it again. Now I'll put $11, which is in the range, and the program ends. And then I want to do the hours portion of it. So what I'll do is I'll cut and paste this, and then basically just change everything. And so, and I do this a lot where I'll actually just cut and paste this. And you notice here for the minimum hours, the minimum hours is not 40. You can't go working less than 0 hours. Then I'll change the max hours to 40. In the U.S., you can only work 40 hours a week before you actually have to get overtime, which is time and a half. So you get 1.5 times your pay. And I always had bosses that would sometimes just send me home when I reached the 40 hours, and it was kind of ridiculous. And they'd be short somebody rather than pay me a little bit extra money for a little bit more work. And then for the kind of the base input hours values, and then I'll go in and change hours. What you can also do is do a cut paste. If you hit Control F, you can do find and find and replace. Just kind of for this demo, so you give you a chance to look at everything while I'm typing. I'm doing the type in everything kind of way of doing it, which is probably actually not the best way. Many times I've actually forgotten I missed something, and then I end up causing my program to not do well. One example I can kind of show you of this is I was doing an email program, and I accidentally did copy paste, and I forgot to change the email value from the subject to the message, and I actually ended up sending the subject line was also the message as well. So now that we have kind of the float values in there, I'm going to also print out the kind of calculate what your wage is. And I'll do that by basically just putting an inline print line statements in your wages, and then do that multiplied by your this by your wage times your hours. And so what I want to do is kind of by default the formatting actually has 4 decimal places in Java is for floating point values. So I'm actually going to use string.format, which uses a C type of syntax as far as formatting the data. And so what the C type of syntax is you type in your strings, and then you put special characters, which are signified by percent signs that will actually format your data a little bit. So I'm going to use the dot to F, which basically the point 2 means the percent sign means it's a special character. The point 2 means that I'm doing 2 decimal places after the decimal place, and the F means it's either a double or a float. And so basically what I'm doing is a money value with 2 decimal places after the float. And then I'm going to put in here hours times wage, which is basically what the weekly pay is going to be. So now I'm going to put the string into the printout statement. So with the string format is writes it to the pay string, and then I'm going to put it in format, and run it, and then you can see what my values are. So minimum wage is $11.50. My hours are 4. I'll do 35 because normally they kind of try to screw you over and you don't get your full pay. Got 40.25 hours, and that's not a bad weekly wage. And then just kind of to show you where everything is, you can see here. Let me scroll down a little bit. That the dollar sign is in the front, and then I have the 450 and 2 cents F. There's also many other syntax values. There's percent sign D, which is for decimal place values. There's also percent sign C, which is for characters. percent sign S is for handling strings. So you can do a bunch of different ones, and I'll probably be showing the string one later on when we do. And if you ever follow along the web programming playlist for Java. And then exception handling is basically trying to catch errors that you don't anticipate. And an exception, when an error is thrown in a program, normally it crashes. But if you throw an error with an exception handler and you have the handler set up to catch a particular error, it will do something. So you might have an error. So say if a user is supposed to enter something in an input as an integer and they enter it as a string, you might have an exception handler that catch that and then ask them to either run it again or just say, okay, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. This user doesn't know what they're doing. I'll put something in there for him or something like that. And so in Java, use a try-catch format. So basically, and I'll show this in the demo here in about a minute, but you have a try statement. So you have this basic scope. We have try. You have the braces, and then you put all the items in there that you think, okay, this is where I expect there to be errors. And the catch portion, basically, if there's an error within that try portion, it will handle that. And so every method, almost every method in Java, has an exception associated with it. So you'd call that exception handler for that particular exception. So say for an instance, you're converting a string into an integer. There's a number format exception um, for that particular value. And with that, you would just say, okay, if I see that exception, I'm gonna catch it. So now I'm gonna go over kind of exception handling. So for exception handling, like I said on the previous slide, you start off with the try. So the try is gonna go around all the regions that have the where you think there might be a possible error. So usually I put them around all input places. And then notice how with the brackets you're going to have scope changes. And so like I mentioned before, the input values are going to be in the next float. And you can see with the brackets I have within those brackets are the scope changes. So I'm going to also put in here catch. So whenever the next float throws an error, and the error for this type is called I think it's input mismatch exception. We're basically saying it's okay. Next float is expecting um, a floating point value, and it ends up getting a different one. And so you can see that if you go into look at if you highlight in Eclipse, if you highlight the value, you can see the input mismatch as part of one of the exceptions. So I have input mismatch exception, and then this is a class, and it's going to go into the of type that, and then it's going to go into the value e. And then I actually need to put this value in, so I'll type it's an actual class of its own, and so I'll put in import java.util.input mismatch exception, and it'll bring in that particular class. And then for this particular code, I'm just going to say, okay, if you messed up this bad, I said enter a value and you enter like a string or something else, I'm just going to close the program. A lot of times you want to have like a little bit more elegant cases, but basically you have to kind of build a loop around that or have some jump statements and all, which I really didn't want to do. And so I'm just going to say totally invalid values, closing program. And then here I kind of made a mistake. I thought, okay, I'm going to use exit, but exit's actually only in C and C++. And so what I need to actually do is just not use this at all. You can notice down below, we're just going to exit the program. think I try return, but that's not the way to go either. For this case, you really want to do just a regular program, just a regular leave. But I did put a return in here, and then I'm gonna fix this here in a second. So you notice here the hours and the wage, I'm getting an error, and that's because those are within the scope of the try statement. So a lot of times you just kind of put everything in the try statement, avoiding keeping everything that's within scope within that particular portion. And so we're not going to use those values later and actually put them in there without much of a problem. And then I also get an error um, because the statement below, um, and I'll scroll down for that here in a sec. Is going to pay strings. So that value needs to go in there as well. So basically you want to put all associated values within the try catch statement. So I run this. I'm going to do junk, and you see it kills the program. So this is an example of exception handling. And I'm going to clean up this program here. But while I'm doing that, if you would please subscribe to this um, channel, and you can see more text on this based on learning.snoozle.net, which is my learning page, or you can also just kind of follow those videos. And if you want to support us, please use the Amazon link below to buy stuff on Amazon.